And for the rest of the people, Eoin Healy is PCVE Program Director, Senior Research Scientist, and PhD Criminology specializing in counterterrorism, extremism, and computational social science. He applies advanced quantitative analysis to inform policy, having led OSINT projects for the US State Department's Bureau of Counterterrorism, where he developed GTTAC, Record of Incident Database Grid. You have probably heard of it. His current work focuses on drone terrorism, extremism in gaming, and the impact of regional conflicts. As a director of policies and programs at Parents for Peace, he works to bridge advanced data analytics with evidence-based interventions against radicalization. Without further ado, the floor is yours, Eoin. Thank you.
Where did you get all this amazing information about this amazing person? He sounds incredible. Hi, everyone. Can you see my full screen here?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the gamer survey that was administered with GEMS. I met up with Maya and Nevin, and they recruited me to help develop, administer, and analyze the data from the gamer survey. And the primary objective is to examine how gaming context intersects with different extremist harms and how they relate to psychological well-being and political activism. And the survey was deployed to 1,500 active multiplayer gamers who were targeted using Survey Swap. I'm going to go relatively quickly through my presentation because I know you all are hungry for your lunch and I'm hungry for my breakfast, but feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions. Geographically, we wanted to oversample in Europe, so we have about 67% of European gamers part of the survey. And the rest were North America and the rest of the world. Now, the survey uses a mix of different instruments that we, in order to kind of build the whole survey that was administered. We adapted the United Nations Counterterrorism Center survey items that were part of its 2021 report on gaming and extremism. We then also included the very well-known and very well-validated RIF psychological well-being scales into the survey. And finally, we used the Activism and Radicalism Intention Scales, or ARIS, which were developed by Moskalenko and Macaulay. And this is to kind of quantify actual readiness to engage in radical behavior. It has 12 different items, kind of distinguishing between lawful activism and illegal action in radicalism. The analytical methods that we used once we got the data back varied. We went simple descriptive statistics. We also have a qualitative analysis. I'm not really a qualitative researcher, but we did qualitative thematic coding of some of the open-ended answers. And we went all the way on to more advanced regression models. So for predicting extremist invitations, which is obviously a binary item, we received an invitation, yes or no. We used logistic regression. We adjusted some of the parameters to account for it being a rare event and prioritize sensitivity of our models. And we use linear regression for predicting some of our scale variables, such as the radicalism scale. So what we found is that hate speech is deeply normalized in these spaces. More than 80% of all of the survey participants had witnessed at least some, right? So if you think of it on a Likert scale, you've got none at one end. So at least some form of hate speech, more than 80%. Misogyny being the most common form of hate speech witnessed. And alarmingly, a quarter of the sample had been personally targeted, usually experiencing some form of verbal abuse, characterized by the kind of normalization of hate speech. So there were a few things that we found as well. This time spent gaming wasn't really correlated with actually witnessing hate speech, but the hours you spent gaming were correlated with the quantity that you were witnessing. And then more heavily correlated was the time you spent on social media, not just spent online gaming. And then even more heavily correlated is the time you spent on different platforms talking about games. So the more time you would spend, the more content you were witnessing. It wasn't where you were witnessing or not. Nearly everybody was witnessing it, but the actual quantity was increasing with the time you were spending. Female gamers were more likely than male gamers to report witnessing misogyny and homophobia. And younger gamers were also more likely to have witnessed more quantities of hateful content. So thinking about the qualitative analysis, and I think we'll probably have time, but at the end I'll go over some of the kind of quotes from our respondents. The issue isn't just the presence of language, it's kind of the cultural normalization of it. And our analysis kind of shows that there's a really highly desensitized population. Players frequently dismiss very severe verbal abuse as just trolls or part of the game. We see persistent gatekeeping of gaming as male-dominated space, and the use of homophobic slurs are just, or racist slurs, kind of hollowed out and kind of put into nearly a default vocabulary that's used to criticize poor gameplay. And the friction against this kind of toxic behavior and this kind of language is incredibly low within the gaming community. When we asked the gamers how they could improve their space. So this is based on analysis of free text responses to the question, how could your experience of playing video games on gaming related platforms be improved? The suggestions are overwhelmingly focused on kind of community management solutions and reducing negative interactions. So to improve the overall experience, participants tend to believe that there should be a more significant focus on reducing the toxicity through stronger moderation or more consistent enforcement of community rules. The problem is a number of participants voiced that the rules are not implemented in a way that is consistent, and that leads to problems in their communities, and particularly in online chat environments. So when receiving an invitation to off the platform is very, very common. 60% of players reported receiving one. So as a general invitation, only about 5.7% players were received an invitation to another platform that would have extremist content. And so only that amount are kind of subjected to overt recruitment in that sense. 2.1% received invitations to a discussion or a platform where they were engaging in illegal activities. Discord is the primary hub for any out of gaming, but also in gaming communication. So it's just the most popular form of communication in this sense. And obviously we have moderation efforts are complicated as there's cross-platform jurisdictional moderation issues. I say predicting here, but obviously we don't have causal effects, right? This is a survey. We don't have control groups. And we're not doing a longitudinal study either. But these are kind of looking at the different relationships that we found in our logistic regression model. So predicting receiving a hateful invitation. What is it that makes you more likely to receive one of these be part of these 5.7% of gamers who receive these? And we find that financial investment is the heaviest predictor in our model, with the highest spending bracket. So you're talking about people who are spending upwards of €500 a month on gaming, more likely to receive a hateful invitation compared to those spending the least amount on gaming, 7 times more likely. And then also grievance. So if you have been a victim, you are also more likely, or if you report having been a victim of hate speech online, you're also more likely to receive an invitation. Also, players who reported a higher level of identification with their university or school were also more likely. So we have an idea of kind of like these the kind of financial investment side, which also appears in the next slide where I'll talk about radicalism, where these players might be very attractive to recruiters as they're very engaged in the community. They might be talked of as whales within their game, and they might be seen as high value targets to recruit into different more extremist groups. This is our linear regression model predicting radical intentions. So the RIS of the ARIS scale. And here again, we find that the higher this financial spend, this is broken down as higher than €100 a month or less, is one of the predictors of having higher levels of radicalism on the scale that we were using. And then again, victimization is also playing a role here, confirming this kind of victim to radical pathway that we're talking about. But we also have some protective factors, right? So strong family bonds or protecting against having more radical attentions, where you were talking about your family group being the one that's most important to you, or on the higher end of the Likert scale, and describing your association with your family group. And strong ethnic and religious ties are actually exploited to identify these kind of radical intentions. I've put it in here actually negative with a negative association. So low self-acceptance means you're more likely to be radical, have radical intentions, or higher levels of radical intentions. But in fact, you can look at it in the opposite way, right? Higher levels of self-acceptance on the RIF self-acceptance subscale that was included in our survey. You know, if you have better levels of self-acceptance, you are less likely to have higher scores on this radicalism scale. So I'm going to just go through some concluding thoughts before we'll go through some of the quotes that I wanted to pull out from some of the survey respondents. Witnessing these hateful interactions in games is quite very, very common. A quarter of the gamers are victimized, and this victimization creates a greater risk for both off-ramping and also radical intentions. Off-ramping invitations, though, are very rare to extremist fora. You know, when you're talking about 5.7%, it doesn't sound like much, but there's also a very large community of gamers, right? So 5.7% starts to take on a different meaning when you think of, you know, 1 billion gamers in the world. The monthly spend appears to be a strong indicator of exposure, both to recruitment networks and also as a risk factor for radicalism. And then we have the importance of one's group that we give the most importance to, both ethnic and religious associated with higher levels, and family associated with lower levels. Kind of as a protective factor and risk factor is like where you're associating most. And also that there are some, you know, psychological understanding of self-acceptance and maybe voids that might be filled by radicalism if you don't have good levels of self-acceptance. And I just want to quickly then, we'll run through some of the kind of quotes that we pulled out from the experiences that our gamers had. And perhaps the most pervasive theme is obviously the gender-based hostility and misogyny. You know, this is a culture that gatekeeps gaming as male-only spaces, subjects women to severe verbal abuse the moment they're identified. You have this domestic stereotype, back to the kitchen, making a sandwich kind of rhetoric. You have skill invalidation with women being supposed worse gamers, and they're going to lose, or you lost the game because there's a female participant in your team. There's also very severe threats, including threats of sexual abuse, which are relatively common as well. And then also the idea, I think this quote here at the end, where they talk about two female gamers getting rape threats and no one in their group intervenes. So this idea that there's no one that's actually, there's very, very low friction, no standing up against some of these comments. The normalization of slurs in game, casual racism just in every aspect, both in xenophobia and anti-immigrant rhetoric, also against Black people. Homophobia being used as a losing label. When someone does something bad, they immediately call them a name like gay, you have a bad game. So the slurs are nearly punctuation in the gaming speech. But also you have targeted harassment of people who are actually gay or who are accused of being gay and targeted because of the choice of their avatar, even. And then also examples of religious and ethnic extremism, of Islamophobia, that you're treated like your religion is lesser or you're called a terrorist. And anti-Semitism and geopolitics, we see that there is a real link to real world geopolitics, especially in the conflict in Israel and Palestine, to anti-Semitism, which is something we find in both the gaming spaces and in research I've done in actual far-right extremist incidents of violence that have occurred in the United States, that it be linked to the geopolitical climate. And then finally, the culture of banter and normalization. Everybody seems to be very desensitized to this. It happens all the time. It's part of the gaming culture. They have no meaning. They're used there because the recipient gets triggered by them. You might be trying to get a competitive edge over the other players, so you're trying to destabilize them. It's just random trolls and they think they're funny. And then because of this, you have strategies that players develop, especially women. You just stay silent. You're non-speaker. Otherwise, as soon as they know that you're a woman, the dynamics will change, especially with very young players. And with that, I would love to hear some of your questions.